Thank you for watching this, Your Voice, Your Future.
Jordan Goodman is America's Money Answers man, and Joe Griffith is a senior fellow advancing American freedom, which is founded by Mike Pence. Joe, what is it like working for Pence now instead of the Heritage Foundation?
I'll tell you, I really love it over at Advancing American Freedom. I am surrounded by several dozen colleagues who adhere to free markets, limited government, and federalism. And as you probably have heard, I have been joined in recent weeks by nearly 20 of my former colleagues at the Heritage Foundation who wanted to find a new home where they can advocate strongly for the ideas that have made this country great: adherence to the Constitution, rule of law, and free enterprise.
Well, what does this say about the Heritage Foundation?
Well, I was, as you're probably aware from our conversations, I became quite troubled over the last few years when I was at the Heritage Foundation as the organization began to be quite silent on a number of matters that should be of concern to all of us, including unconstitutional executive orders that are throwing a monkey wrench into our free market economic system. And I think American families are really beginning to experience some of that turmoil over the past year with rising prices on a lot of goods, thanks in large part to the unconstitutional tariffs that were put in place over the past year. But like I said, we have a wonderful home now at Advancing American Freedom. And as Dr. Fulner often said, onward, and that's what we're prepared to do.
Now, Jordan Goodman, with the Fed chair Jerome Powell turning in May of this year, and President Trump's nomination of Kevin Warsh drawing pushback from some senators, what does this leadership uncertainty signal for markets and everyday Americans who are borrowing money or planning big purchases? And what do we know about Kevin?
He's the skeptic of the Fed, and he's been very critical of the Fed in many cases. So, for example, during COVID, when Powell and the Fed brought interest rates down to zero to help the economy, Kevin Warsh thought that was a bad idea. It turned out it was a good idea in some ways, but it did spawn inflation as well. So they kind of kept it too low for too long, and Warsh was a critic of that. So I think you'd see that against people basically think he's hawkish, wanting to prevent inflation in various ways. So that would be a good thing. But he also looks at the data very carefully. One of the things he's thinking is that the combination of deregulation and artificial intelligence is a disinflationary or deflationary trend. So that as those go in, and we're seeing a lot of deregulation and artificial intelligence being spread all over the place, that might mean inflation would be lower than it would be otherwise. So those are things he's looking for.
Well, Joe, how might a new Fed chair, whether Warsh or another nominee, and it looks like it's going to be Warsh, shift the Fed's approach to interest rates, inflation, and economic growth? And what would that mean for mortgage rates, these savings yields, and credit card costs?
Well, Kevin Warsh has, of course, served on the Fed board before, back 2006 to 2011, and I'm actually quite cheered by this nomination. Kevin Warsh has articulated numerous times recently that he believes the way to grow our economy and expand prosperity for all, including the middle class, is to expand supply, expand economic growth. And there are many economists, including several who have served at the Fed, that believe that it's economic growth that can lead to inflation. Well, that's not the case. Economic growth does not cause inflation. What causes inflation is too many dollars created by the Fed chasing too few goods. So I'm encouraged by that. I'm also very encouraged that Warsh has spoken out about the necessity to have the Fed independent of politicians. And he's warned numerous times, and has been quite prophetic, that when you have the Fed juicing the economy by printing too many dollars, like it did back when he was on the board in 2006, and again, back during the COVID era, that leads to misallocation of capital, which means lower productivity growth, and it also leads to higher inflation. So I'm confident that Kevin Warsh will stand firm against meddling in the Fed by politicians, including President Trump, and I believe that he will do his best to diminish the footprint that the Fed has on our economy.
You know, it's interesting, Jordan, that Warsh is the man is going to push back against the president politicizing the Fed, because one of the conflicts that he had with Jerome Powell is that Jerome Powell refused to do his bidding.
Correct. Well, Warsh is supposedly going to be independent, and people were feeling better about it, that he's going to maintain the independence of the Fed. If President Trump had announced like Kevin Hassett as the Fed chair, I think people would have been more worried about that. He's this economic council guy, and he would have been kind of in Trump's pocket, and the independence of the Fed would be lost. So I think that's heartens people a little bit, that Warsh will think his own way. Now, it's going to be interesting. The board of the Federal Reserve has 12 members on it. At the most recent meeting last week, it was a 10-2 vote not to cut interest rates. That's some dissent. Normally, there isn't even that much dissent. It's supposedly kind of a consensus-building institution. Warsh may be out of step with a lot of those other 11 people on the board, and he may want to do things that the other ones do not want to do. So you could have some very contentious board meetings over this, which has not happened in the Powell era.
But how much of this is tied to economic data versus political and confirmation uncertainty surrounding the Fed chair nomination in and of itself, Jordan?
Well, I mean, the economic data has been mixed. The employment market's been pretty weak. Inflation's still higher than the Fed looking for. The latest numbers, I think, was 2.8%. They're still looking for 2%. And there's signs the economy is really quite weak. The tariffs have taken a toll on the economy, people paying more for inputs on goods. And so I think that's something the Federal Reserve is worried about. That's why they're not lowering rates faster, is the impact of tariffs, which might be about to change any day, Armstrong, because the Supreme Court has clearly already made a decision about the
But why are they delaying the release of that decision?
That's been a bit of a mystery. Here we are in February. They had their hearings on it in early November. They've clearly made the decision, it's ready to go, but they have not released it, maybe because they don't want to upset the markets. But by now it should have been released, and it could be released any day.
Well, the fact that it's delayed, Joel, is certainly an indication that it does not favor President Trump, and I'll tell you why. Because none of the liberal justices have leaked anything. That is the glaring sign.
Yeah, well, you
think
make
about
a great
it.
point there, Armstrong.
Yes.
And I'm with Jordan. I believe this is going to be an overwhelmingly lopsided decision against Trump's use of these tariffs. The question is what those opinions will look like. Will there be refunds given? Will those refunds be limited only to those importers that have already filed lawsuits? And another reason for the delay in this decision may be a lot of negotiation between the justices to see who can get whom to sign onto their opinions. You could have even a 9-0 opinion striking down these tariffs, but you could have up to 9 different rationales. And I think there's right now a process of consolidation trying to get a majority of the justices behind a single opinion on this. And that would be more powerful.
The fact that there has not been a whisper from the court is all we need to know. But Jordan, some lawmakers and experts argue that the executive branch should have more power over the Federal Reserve chair, while others defend Fed independence. What's at stake for Americans if political influence over the Federal Reserve grows stronger?
Every president always wants lower interest rates. Always. That's the way it is. But that doesn't mean we should have lower interest rates. I mean, as Joel was saying, during COVID, when interest rates were brought down to zero for 4 years or so, it was quite a while, it helped in the short term, but in the long term, it really hurt. And that's the money printing that was going on that caused inflation that we're still dealing with. The Fed's balance sheet went from about $2 trillion to $9 trillion during COVID. That's in the long term bad. That's inflationary. That's that more money chasing fewer goods kind of thing we had. So you really want independence of the Fed to make decisions based on economic data, not political pressure.
So, Joe, can you break down what the Digital Asset Market Clarity Act of 2025 proposes and why its classification of digital assets as commodities versus securities matters for consumers and investors?
Yes, this is a multi-hundred-page piece of legislation that the Senate has only been given a few hours to review before they're going to vote on quite shortly here. But there is a lot of gimmickry and a lot of grift within the crypto and alternative asset sector. And one of the big concerns that I've had with the alternative asset space, including stable coins, is that you have a lot of entities that want to act as if they're banks by taking your stable coins, holding them, and then paying you rewards or interest. They want to act like banks, but they don't want the regulations. And the fear is that some of those companies are actually siphoning away quite a bit of capital from the regulated banking sector, which will actually drive up interest rates for the rest of us and could make our economy more unstable. I think it's very important that the Senate take a very close look at this legislation to ensure that it's not going to weaken the economy, weaken our banking sector that's so crucial to our economic growth, and in order to just give away favors to those that are spending millions of dollars.
But who's going to regulate crypto, and how would clear regulatory authority benefit or hurt everyday Americans dealing with these digital assets like Bitcoin or stable coins, as you mentioned?
Well, look, when it comes to crypto, including Bitcoin, there's a lot of hope. There's a lot of hysteria, and there's a lot of people hoping to get rich either quickly or in the median team. This is a speculative asset. It's a so-called asset in that it doesn't generate any revenue. It's not like any other type of company or asset in which you purchase, such as real estate, and you're actually generating cash flow through the years. Much of this has been built on hysteria with a number of very large early investors pumping it up, getting regular folks to go ahead and buy in. And my fear is that there are going to be a lot of bag holders with this. If you look at Bitcoin just since the end of September, going from nearly $130,000 at Bitcoin to $75,000 over the weekend. What that means is that if you would have put $1,000 into crypto in the fall, you would only have around $650 remaining right now. It's very risky, does not produce revenue, and because of that, it is very hard to borrow, and that's something that all listeners should be aware of.
And we'll be back. And let me say goodbye to Jordan and Joel and thank them for joining us in the earlier segment. We're joined now by Leah Wilson with the MAHA report. Leah, welcome back to the broadcast.
Thank you so much, Armstrong. It's great to be here.
Yes. What inspired you to write Reclaim Vitality and share this story with us?
Absolutely. I mean, have you ever seen the show The Biggest Loser?
No.
You haven't? Okay.
No, I'm
well,
not a big
Jillian
TV guy.
Michaels. Yeah. Jillian Michaels produced a show decades ago showing that people could lose weight if they were taken out of their broken environment, taken away from their excuses, taken away from the naysayers in their circle. And these people were losing hundreds of pounds that never thought weight loss was possible. And really what that evidenced was that your body can change when you change the environment, when you realize that there is hope, when you realize that there are options. And we saw this immersion into a healing environment be extremely powerful for one of our foster children, Lad. He came to us with glaucoma, sleeping issues, very inflamed, afraid of men, type 2 diabetes. And within 3 to 4 months, every single one of those issues were reversed and in complete remediation. And it's amazing to see when a little guy is fed whole, real, organic foods, has chiropractic adjustments for his nervous system, listens to worship music with the family, has consistent boundaries and a good circadian rhythm, that even with odds stacked against him, he healed in such a short amount of time. And seeing that healing journey not because we set out to heal him, but because we set out to care for him, was inspiring. And we wanted to help other people recognize that they can view health and healing differently, and that there are options, and that there is hope. And when providers tell you otherwise, you have to seek a different solution.
Address the intersection, because you're touching on something here, of the mind, body, and spirit.
I mean, is it an intersection? Is it all one thing? And I think that more and more people are wanting to look at health as in a holistic manner. But then when you put it to the test, do they really treat it that way? Do they really believe that their words are powerful, their thoughts are powerful? Research shows us that they are, that what you believe in your mind is very indicative of your outcomes. There's a theory called the nocebo effect, where if you are told something such as, we're going to give you a chemotherapy drug and you're going to lose your hair and get sores in your mouth and have no energy, and then they give you a saline solution through your needle instead of chemotherapy, you still have a good chance of losing your hair, getting sores in your mouth, and having zero energy and vomiting. And that's the power of what we anticipate or expect to happen. And so the biblical principle of take every thought captive is not just a good idea, but it's necessary if we want to move away from unnecessary suffering.
You know, I have a very disciplined regiment for exercise every day, and also for food, and also for beverages and reducing sugars. Talk about, for our audience, the habits and patterns that people set in their lives that impact their health and their well-being more than anything else, and how they need to look at these habits and patterns and make a change, or sometimes strengthen what they're already doing.
So in Reclaim Vitality, we break all of that down, Armstrong, in the concept of virtues, because what people need is a framework. They need a different framework to live by, not just more how-tos or checklist. And so when you're talking about things such as your food, we have a whole chapter on food temperance, which goes into not only your food choices and making good food choices, but also your relationship with food and living a fasted lifestyle. That if we go, the recommended times without food, that's where healing really happens. That humans were never meant to have constant intake and to be constantly mediating digestion. And there's also parts of the book about movement and breath. What are we doing with our movement? Are we not exercising 6 days a week and then exercising at 10 out of 10 intensity for the other days? Or are we going at a consistency and intensity that supports a daily rhythm? And so the book really outlines how to view these things differently so that it supports you building a sustainable vitalistic framework for your own life. So yeah, I'm like you, I prioritize working out because I know that oxygen is necessary for life, that it's a huge indicator, not just something that is for healthy people or people that value health, but it's necessary for human existence and for human vitality.
Something that I'd love for you to address, which I don't think is discussed enough in people optimizing their best health, is that we don't discuss these trapped emotions and past traumas that people have refused to deal with, that brings about stress and the anxiety. Even when they make these attempts, they just cannot keep the consistency. They fall off, whether it's alcohol, whether it's something that traumatized them as a child, maybe it's something that they're dealing with that they just can't express, and so these emotions are trapped, and it creates trauma in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean, it's rampant today, and I think we could talk all day about the reasons why that might be, but mental fortitude is a virtue of a vitalist. And when you look at mental fortitude, it requires addressing the brutal facts, looking at where you want to be against your reality, against where you have been, and being honest with yourself. If there's a, survivor's principles and mentalities is you have to be honest with yourself in what you're currently experiencing before you can move forward. And so if you look at the concept of mental fortitude, it's our job to know our story. And if our story is keeping us trapped, then we need to reframe it and rewrite that story so that we can agree with what's true about our reality and about our future, because we get a say in that. We get a say in our future and how we step forward. And if we don't face what is true, maybe it's you refer to biblical truth or something different, then it keeps you stuck and not moving forward.
So what are the core principles of the MAHA roadmap, and how does environment play a role in someone's ability to heal and move on?
Yes. So the principles, there's 3 principles. 1, the body is designed to heal. So it's always doing the right thing at the right time. Number 2, it can be devitalized by 3 different things: thoughts, traumas, and toxins. So all of those have to do with our environment, but in large part, the toxins is one of the things people think about with the impact of the environment. Number 3, every intervention needs to be aligned with revitalization. So if you're assaulting or fighting against the body in order to bring itself out of a state of devitalization, it keeps you stuck and frustrated. And so we walk the reader through exactly what that looks like in how we aren't supposed to be afraid of our environment. We have an onslaught of chemical attacks and toxicity and non-native EMFs, all of those things in our environment that we can't avoid, quite frankly. But the body is resilient, and when we support it as such, then we will adapt at the highest level possible to avoid unnecessary sufferings. Even the Bible tells us that there will be suffering. It's not like we're going to avoid all suffering, but if we support our body as something that heals and is able to heal, then we'll be as adaptable and resilient as possible.
Well, I really appreciate your strong faith, which is the foundation of everything for you. You and I definitely share that, and we should never be apologetic about it. As we say goodbye to you, Leah, are there things that people can read? How can they find out more about you and gain access to this information?
Yes, you can go to reclaimvitality.com to learn more about the book or purchase that. You can also go to standforhealthfreedom.com and join us there as we fight for things such as parental rights, religious freedom, informed consent, privacy, and free speech. So thank you so much, Armstrong, for having me on. It was a pleasure to spend a few minutes with you tonight.
It's just never enough, right? We got to have you back.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yes. And when we come back, John Commerford and Dominick Izzo will join us to talk about gun rights, First and Second Amendment, and much more. We'll be back.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. And welcome back to the broadcast with John Commerford, NRA executive, director, and Dominick Izzo, 16-year police veteran. We welcome you both to the broadcast. So let us set the stage. Can you summarize, in your opinion, what happened in the Minneapolis shootings and killings of Alex Pretty and Renee Good, and the federal enforcement operation that brought ICE and the CBP agents into these confrontations? What could have been changed? What could have been better? Your assessment.
Look, first, it's a tragic situation. I think everybody can understand that. However, it's a great example of you need to let law enforcement do the job that law enforcement were hired to do. Don't interfere with a lawful police activity. Don't inject yourself into that overly tense situation. Everybody has a right to lawfully protest. They have a right to carry a firearm to a protest. I know that's come up recently. But you don't have a right to interfere with law enforcement activity. So we see immigration laws being enforced. Voters voted to have immigration laws being enforced, deport violent criminals that are on our streets. But in the end, this led to a tragic situation, and we saw Governor Walz and others inflaming that situation by encouraging people to interfere with our law enforcement officers that are out on the street, and they want to just get home to their family as well.
What about the president's tone?
Look, I mean, I think there's been some off-the-cuff remarks that have been blown out of proportion when it comes to Second Amendment rights. What other president, first off, is going to stand in front of the helicopter and take the sheer volume of questions that President Trump takes? Most presidents will walk right by. But I look at actions, and I look at the people in the administration around the president who implement those policy positions and those actions.
So what about the Department of Homeland Security statements from Kristen Noem? Well, because what she said was absolutely not true, by the way.
It has been an issue. There's no other way to describe it. But when you look at Kristi Noem, you look at her record on the Second Amendment's impeccable.
Yeah, but we're not talking about her record on the Second Amendment. We're talking about her rhetoric during a time what they tried to frame Peretti as, which is just not true.
Well, we take an approach of let's stop, let's take a look at the facts of the situation, let's look at the information we know, and then make a statement on that. I think when you look at the administration's comments over the past couple weeks, I think there could have been a little more thought put into some of the comments. But you look at Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, we thought his comments were spot on. He took a more measured approach from the administration, and we've seen a little bit more of him on television recently. But the fact is, the left has been trying to drive a wedge in the Second Amendment community. We see Governor Newsom, who banned Glocks in his state, coming out and sounding like the biggest Second Amendment advocate in the world. That's because they know they're trying to drive a wedge. They're trying to take advantage of social media and people consuming this information 24/7 to try to impact those midterm elections. We're not going to let that happen.
So, Dominick, my brother, welcome back to the broadcast. Then why all of a sudden did the president abandon his earlier strategy of placing ICE in these different places, and all of a sudden he says he's not going to send ICE in anymore unless these governors and state officials invite him in, because he's going to lower the temperature, and he placed Tom Homan in place of really Kristen Noem and Coreyland Dendosky. I mean, it's a demotion. I mean, because listen, it is no secret the war between Holman and Kristen Noem. So obviously, the president wanted to de-escalate. Dominick?
I don't think he did a good job of de-escalating. I think he put people in a position to run operations that were absolutely done abysmally. We saw, law enforcement. This could have been done and handled if the municipal police departments, county sheriff, state police, all had done what they're supposed to do, which is serve the community, and put up a barrier between ICE doing the job that they had to do and the people and their right to protest. If that was allowed to have happened, you wouldn't have seen any of these issues. This was poor planning. We've seen ICE agents with their subpar training, dealing with citizens with incidents they're not even remotely qualified to deal with, in my opinion. And then it's fanning the flames of political rhetoric on both sides. Your guest there talks about how the Democrats and liberals are after guns. I've never seen, and I voted for Trump twice. I didn't vote in the 2016 election, but I've never seen in these last several weeks, conservatives, MAGA, Republican, very well-known blue check marks calling for people who are exercising their Second Amendment to be arrested and charged. This is absolutely the worst planned operation to remove illegal immigrants I've ever seen. And this is nothing new. We've been doing this for decades. I do not understand how it was so poorly planned this time around.
So you've concluded that Peretti should not have died.
He should not have died. Of course he shouldn't have died. I'm not going to mince words here at all. Number one, I've never seen 7, 8 cops on one person, and all of a sudden that person winds up being disarmed and then is executed in the street. It was utterly ridiculous. The one thing that people have to stop running to is these two catchphrases, impeding and it's impeding. I can't remember what the other one is, but it's akin to law enforcement where we had disorderly conduct charge. And disorderly conduct charge was the easiest thing to slap on anyone. You can articulate any impediment whatsoever and then go ahead and take somebody in handcuffs. These ICE agents are sloppy, they're ill-trained, and they're dangerous on the streets. And these protesters are allowed to do whatever they want. So again, municipal, state, county law enforcement could have come in and taken care of all this, and it would have been never done in the first place.
So let me come back to you. Obviously, there's been sloppiness on both sides, especially with ICE. I mean, you have 7 people surrounding Peretti. They take his gun away from him, and then they try to manipulate what was on the video. I mean, it's just, come on. Everything is about credibility here. Peretti shouldn't have died.
He shouldn't have died because he shouldn't have interjected himself in the law enforcement situation. Now, I'm not defending
So he made bad judgment. But they were always in control. ICE, there were 7 ICE agents. They took his gun. Why shoot him?
But if you look at the videos from a week before, he's had a history of interjecting himself in that situation.
But that doesn't mean he should die because he used bad judgment, does it? Or maybe I don't know.
I'm not defending the officer's use of force in this situation, but I'm also realizing the situation that if he was peacefully protesting, standing on the sidewalk, nowhere near those law enforcement officers conducting their activity, he would be alive today, and that's a fact. But back to the Second Amendment aspect that keeps getting wedged in there because he had a firearm at the situation. Again, you can lawfully carry a firearm, assuming you're legally allowed to be there. But Peretti, and again, it's a tragic situation, but he'd be alive today if he would have peacefully been standing away from those officers, protesting like he has a lawful right to do, and not injecting himself. And certainly not like we saw him break the taillight out of one of their vehicles a week before.
Go ahead, Dominick.
What does that have to do with anything? I'm so tired, and I am. I cannot consider myself Republican anymore because of how absolutely abhorrently they're behaving, all this. But we now will condemn people for what they did eons ago, right? We saw the nation flip with George Floyd, how everybody condemned Derek Chauvin and what he did. And then a year later, we have to interject George Floyd's criminal history and demonize that man. So now that's what conservatives do. What happened to Peretti was an execution. It was law enforcement murder, and they're going to get away with it. But that's the only saving grace now. MAGA Republicans and conservatives have to come up and go, oh, look, he kicked out a taillight a week before. Great. And let's find out what he had for lunch. See, the biggest problem that what we don't do ever is we never look into those who did the shooting, right? Let's take a look at the police officers. They're not even police officers. They're not law enforcement, in my opinion. They're hired guns. We don't look at what they ate for breakfast. We don't look at their financial situations. We don't look at whether or not they are getting an argument with their wife that morning or their kids ditched school. We have no idea what their political ideology is, what their character is, but just, because they were on scene and we swore them in and gave them 6 weeks of online training, they're clearly qualified to execute somebody, but Peretti deserved to die because he kicked out a taillight. It is utter garbage with this argument.
So let me come back to you on something that we mentioned earlier, and that is, I think everybody is for deporting gangs. People have been processed for deportation, and criminals who threaten our way of life. But let's just say someone has been in this country 20 or 30 years, have a family, thriving businesses, they contribute. The only record that they have that may be criminal is that they came here illegal 30 years ago. Should they be deported?
Look, I work for the National Rifle Association. We focus on one issue, and that's defending Second Amendment rights. I can understand why the administration wants to enforce law and order. The president campaigned on enforcing law and order.
Well, let me change it. Should we give them a pathway to citizenship before deporting them?
Well, that's something for the elected officials to discuss. From my standpoint, from the NRA standpoint and protecting the Second Amendment, that's what our elected officials are for. Open debate on that and policies that they can implement. But violent criminals certainly should be deported, and there's plenty on our streets that they can look at.
Do you think there's a better way we could deport? I think these images is going to have a huge impact on the midterm election. I think, I mean, if you look at the surveys among Republicans, they just don't like it. Just think it's gone too far.
Well, look, you see Tom Homan taking a different approach to it already, trying to have conversations with the local elected officials there. And
it's working.
And see how that works out. I think the American people do want to see violent criminals off our streets. They do want to see violent criminals held behind bars. They want to see an end to that revolving door of justice that we saw in plenty of our big blue cities out there. And they want to be able to protect themselves by exercising their Second Amendment rights. And they want to be able to exercise their First Amendment right. But in terms of the images that are on TV, look, we want to have a successful midterm election. That's how we get pure pro-Second Amendment policies in place. That's how we protect judicial nominations. That's how we don't end up in D.C. mired in impeachment and oversight hearings for the next 2 years after that election. So things need to be done to make sure we stabilize the electorate, we energize those moderate voters, and we get the Trump voters to show up to the polls when he's not on the ballot.
So, Dominick, you know, there's this legislation that's sweeping the country in Maryland and Virginia where they want to force ICE agents to demask. They don't want ICE working with local federal agencies. And many of these legislations, especially here in Maryland, they're trying to pass this legislation, but it's unconstitutional. It won't even hold muster. It's a waste of time. But it's all about the midterm elections and giving the Democratic donors a narrative and giving their progressive constituency a narrative that said, at least I tried, but it's not going anywhere. And now we have this debate with this partial government shutdown, which is still ongoing because of the issue of ICE and whether or not how they should be deployed across the country.
This is political, and that's all this is.
Yes.
Again, this is a Trump mess. These people that you're talking about being deported, they've lived in our neighborhoods for generations, and nobody has had a problem about it before. And incidentally, we've been deporting them for years. Your municipal cops who stop people for DUIs, respond to domestics, go to retail thefts, they deal with these people all the time. And when they transport them to county, the system was in place, at least when I was a cop, where you'd have a hold on them. And then the federal government was notified and deportation was determined. It was an extremely smooth system. All this is to rally the base for election time. That's all this is. It doesn't shock me that the federal government doesn't want to work with local cops. And my stance, too, is I am an absolutist on a couple different things. The Second Amendment, all gun laws are unconstitutional, and I believe every single illegal immigrant should be deported. No ifs, ands, or buts. But the methodology, how you do it, is an issue. I take massive issue with watching extremely influential MAGA Trump voters now believing that illegal immigration is now somehow synonymous with pedophile and rapist. That's all we hear. We hear 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people getting swept up by ICE, and then Kristi Noem will show up 5 mugshots of some very monstrous people who were collected. It shows the percentage is completely outweighed for the people we don't know who are arrested. So the bottom line for this, it is an absolutely political system. What he's doing right now, Trump, this is all for votes. This is all to rally his base, to get them infuriated. How it is being done is completely wrong. Federal government never works with municipal. They will never tell you what they're doing, where they're at, all that, and it's a damn shame on them. Because if ICE went in and they had told Minneapolis, hey, listen, this is where we're going to be. We need 20 of your guys. We need you to coordinate off this street, that street. nothing would have happened. This would have been extremely smooth. So I blame this on Trump and his planning, or whoever he put in place to plan this. It just was done completely for political purposes.
Your voice, your future. We'll be back.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
So, John, from a gun owner's rights standpoint, what responsibilities should lawful firearm carriers understand when interacting with federal agents during a protest or enforcement operation?
Well, look, I think you have to take this in. Concealed carry is a responsibility, whether it's open carry, concealed carry, exercising that right. You have responsibilities as well, even with that freedom. If you get pulled over by a law enforcement officer, some states require you to notify that you have a permit, some don't. We always advocate for that. Some states require an ID, some don't. 29 states don't even require you to have a permit at all. So for instance, in Minnesota, it was a $25 civil fine for not having an ID. So it's always a good thing if you're carrying a firearm. First, don't inject yourself into a law enforcement situation. But second, if you're approached by law enforcement, it is a good practice to let them know you're carrying a firearm, and in some states, you're required to.
You know, Dominick, I must tell you, as someone who's a proud gun owner, you know, I run around law enforcement all the time. I would never, would be comfortable at any protest, at any rally, and I've attended many, carrying my firearm, knowing law enforcement is there carrying also. I just not. Because I never know what's going to happen that could toss me into the middle of a situation, and I don't want to be armed. I know that's their judgment. I know that's what they want to do, but going, and especially when you had a confrontation 11 days before, this same situation costs you your life. But are there legal protections or limits for gun owners in these kinds of confrontations, Dominick? And do current interpretations of use of force law serve ordinary gun owners well in, let's say, in federal enforcement scenarios?
Now, I'm going to say something that's very carefully, and it's just to create a discussion, right? The Second Amendment talks about the right to keep and bear arms, and I was talking about this the other day. So that means we can own them and we can display them when need be, right? We could posture them. It says nothing about using them. When you really break it down, we all advocate about you can own them and you can carry them. But no one ever talks about when you should actually put them to use if it goes against a tyrannical government. If we're going to break down, and remember, I'm law enforcement, former law enforcement, I'm pro-law enforcement, but if the Preddy situation was not the definitive example of where the Second Amendment should have been used, then I don't know what is. Because you had government unlawfully seizing someone, kidnapping them, and isn't the Second Amendment designed so that the American citizen can protect themselves?
Are you serious?
I'm 100% putting this up for discussion.
Up for discussion. Okay, for discussion.
It is not advocacy. Man. I don't ever want to see it. I won't go to protests. Sure, will not carry a protest. It's a discussion of if we're going to be so hell bent on this.
So you're saying now, what you're saying now, though, that gun owner was facing a tyrannical government.
Based on the seizure? Based on the fact that ICE does not have seizure powers over American citizens?
Yes.
By definition, does that not?
Wow.
It's a legitimate question. It's a legitimate question because what we have people in discussions all the time is saying, well, should have.
So you're saying he had the right? He had the right to defend himself?
I'm simply posing that question.
I'm posing it to you now. Did he have the right to defend himself?
I don't have that answer, and that's the problem.
Okay.
I wish I had the answer. But if we're legitimately, I respect everybody who owns. I think everybody should own. I wish to God we can go back to not having any of these states' laws and states' rights actually restricting the Second Amendment. I wish that everybody would carry, regardless of whatever their state says, according to the federal government and our God-given rights. But when it comes down time to it, and it's a judgment call, I'm posing this question, and I'm not endorsing this. I'm not suggesting it. I'm simply asking, what American citizen who is much smarter than I am, is going to interpret their interaction with law enforcement and an unlawful seizure the legitimate time where the Second Amendment comes into play? This is why everything right now is so damn dangerous, and why these ICE raids and everything else that's going on with lack of connection and work with local law enforcement is causing these problems. So I don't think we're out of the woods anytime soon in this yet, but these are questions that people need to start asking themselves.
John, answer these questions.
Look, again, he interjected himself into a law enforcement situation. That was not tyranny occurring to him. He was in the middle of the situation. Again, it was tragic. He was pepper sprayed. He was resisting. He was thrown to the ground. A firearm was removed, and then a firearm went off. And then the law enforcement officers responded with deadly force. It's a tense situation. I'm not defending their actions here, but again, you have to wait till the investigation. Let's see all the body cam footage. Let's see when the firearm went off.
You've seen it.
So here's a question.
I've seen that. I've seen the protesters filming.
Does that mean we need to wait and have more American citizens killed during this? Because what did they pepper spray him for? What was the seizure for? Yeah, he was in the middle of the road. That's a vehicle code infraction. Have a state cop come up and remove him. What was he seized for? What was he pepper sprayed for? And these are questions. I'm not arguing. I'm simply stating if we're going to have federal.
Let me ask you this question: had you been in the situation that Peretti found himself in, and you were armed, what would you have done?
What role am I playing? Am I a protester or am I law enforcement?
You're a protester.
Protester? I'm not going anywhere near him.
There you go. What if you're law enforcement?
Law enforcement? Am I state or am I ICE?
You're ICE.
I'm ICE. I can't enforce municipal vehicle codes. And anything, I can make up anything to say you're impeding me.
So there's this growing distrust, John, among gun owners and the broader public toward federal law enforcement in this incident. What are the implications of this further erosion of trust for cooperation with law enforcement?
Well, again, you see the left driving this issue continuously as a wedge. I see it every day on social media. Now, when you get out of the bubble, you get out of the social media sphere. I was at a gun range yesterday. Not one person brought this issue up. So when you get off of social media, go out to Cabela's, 30 miles from where we're sitting today, see how many people are talking about this. I'm not saying that's right, that's wrong, but it's not as that level of intensity that you see on X or on other social media. People are out living their lives and they're going on about their day. Law-abiding gun owners are interacting with law enforcement on a daily basis, mainly with local law enforcement or state law enforcement, but sometimes with federal law enforcement, and we don't see this type of tragedy occurring. Again, this gentleman was in the road. He did have his camera. It did lead to a tragic situation. But if he was protesting lawfully, he was parked on the sidewalk, he didn't interfere with those officers, Mr. Peretti would be at home tonight.
What about, do you lay any blame on the governor and the mayor of Minnesota and Minneapolis, Izzo, do you? Do they bear any responsibility for this?
No, we know politicians are going to wind up keeping their jobs, and I actually blame the municipal cops. We've seen this time and time again. We've seen officers stand down while cities burn during Ferguson, during Chaz and Chop, during the Antifa, Black Lives Matter. We keep backing the blue, and all these cops keep standing down while your cities burn. And then they'll enforce mandates and rip you off beaches if you're not wearing a mask and pull you out of a church, a school meeting, or a gym. And once again, here we have the Minneapolis police officers who are following orders from their chain of command and watching their cities being destroyed. I actually blame police unions, and I blame individual police officers, the rank and file, not the command staff who takes orders from a mayor. So we know mayors are going to be political, governors are going to be political. We need police officers to step up to the plate and look right at their command staff and go, no, we are going to go and serve our town the way that we swore an oath to. So I place the blame solely at their feet.
John?
The temperature needs to be toned down. We said that in our initial statement after this incident. If you look at Governor Walz and the mayor, they're encouraging folks to interject themselves into a dangerous situation, not to peacefully protest at a defined location or even on the sidewalk, but they want them to be filming the law enforcement officers. They want them to remove their masks and have their names on their uniforms so they can be doxxed by the radical left. In the end, the temperature needs to come down because that's in the best interest of the American public. That's in the best interest of our law enforcement, whether it's state or federal, because they need to go home to their families and they need to be able to go on the job tomorrow and protect us again. It's in the best interest of law-abiding citizens in Minneapolis and Minnesota and anywhere across this country, because you should be able to lawfully protest, whether you're armed or not, whether you're open carrying, concealed carrying, or just standing on the street making your voice heard. We're all Americans after all. We need to be able to exercise those God-given rights we're given through our Constitution. We need to be able to do that on a daily basis. We need to be able to vote safely come this November and tone the temperature down. Let's take a look at things. We saw the President Trump sending Homan to Minneapolis, and we saw the temperature come down. So let's see where that goes, and let's make sure no tragedies happen after that.
Dominick, your final thoughts?
I'm so glad that you agree doxing is a bad thing. Now, number one, you know, I was a cop from 2001 till 2019. I never wore a mask and my name was on my shirt. But I'm glad you agree doxing is a bad thing, because several very large multi-millions of blue checkmark Second Amendment supporters openly doxed men who were lawfully carrying but were liberal. So I'm glad that the NRA agrees that anybody who is a member of the NRA, who's a Republican, a conservative, MAHA, supports the NRA, that you guys condemn when a conservative will openly dox a liberal for exercising their Second Amendment. I'm glad you put that out there.
Listen, I cannot thank Jordan Goodman and our guests for joining us earlier. And Dominick, it's always a pleasure. John, it's a pleasure having you on. I hope to have you back. Thank you so much for joining us here for Your Voice, Your Future. This conversation continues among you, but we've got to de-escalate. We've got to respect law enforcement. We've got to. They put their lives on the line. They're doing their jobs. Thank you for joining us for this edition.